All right, so principle number one, defining the UAS project. Defining the UAS project begins by asking questions, right? And I'm a scientist, and the scientific method is always to ask questions, and that's how you derive answers. So it sort of makes sense to me. Okay, the most influential question starts at the end. What do we hope to deliver at the end of this project? Okay, that chunk. What do we want to deliver? Okay, why? Why the current payload or sensor? Right. So why are we considering a UAS for the mission? Is the UAS the most appropriate platform? You guys come from an aviation background. If everyone thinks UAS sounds so sexy, so everyone that thinks they want data from above thinks, oh, I want a drone to do that. Reality is, if you're mapping 100, 500 acres or something like that, it's way more effective to mount a camera in a Cessna or a manned aircraft and collect data over, within one flight, as opposed to trying to spend a week collecting data over 500 acres. Why are we using the selected UAS? Is it optimal, or is it really what is available? Right, so first principle is just all about asking questions. So the project or mission execution may vary greatly depending on the relevance of UAS product delivery to the overall project. Consider the application of using UAS to provide reconnaissance to inform wildfire fighting crews. All right, so I have I provide a couple examples here. And this is basically how you would answer this first assignment for the UAS project, okay? And I look at two different examples, and I provide you two examples of how to define the project within those examples. All right, so example number one. As part of a UAS crew, the UAS mission may be simply to identify the distance between the crew's current location and a known hotspot. All right, so imagine you're part of a firefighting crew out on a wildfire line, and you have a drone as part of your team, and you receive information via radio that there's a hotspot. So we talk about firefighting. There are two things in the firefighting domain. There's black and there's green, right? And what that means is black has been burned and green has not been burned. So black is usually our safe zone, right? Because the fuels are all consumed and we can get to the black and we're safe. If we're in the green, when a fire overtakes us, that's dangerous stuff. It's a dangerous situation because that means we can get burned up. So imagine we're on the fire line, we're in the crew, we get a radio communication. Hey, there's a spot fire in the green. Can you put your UAS up in the air? And all we want to do is we want to identify the distance between our location and that known hotspot. So that's objective number one. Or that's mission number one. All right, so the second example. So that mission can be accomplished with a short flight and video. Great. Second example, what if the mission is to determine resource allocation of multiple crews over the next week? So in this case, UAS may be used to map fuels and terrain over large areas. Thermal sensors may be used to measure the severity of current fires, as this can impact the rate of spread. Right, so in this case, what we're talking about is mapping a very large area. Right, so we want to get an idea we want to tell the incident commander, what do we expect this fire to do over the next week? Does he need to order more resources? Does he need to demobilize some of the existing resources because he has too much? So this is a much more complicated question. All right, and so to begin understanding the complexity of every UAS flight, we must start by understanding why we are here to begin with. All right, so defining the UAS project. So we have a problem, we have a project issue, we have a problem statement, and then we have an overall goal, and then we have specific objectives. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to work through those two examples with these overall goals and objectives. Okay, so like every scientific mission, we provide clarity and understanding to everyone involved with the project by defining these objects. So our issue statement is, why is the project necessary? Why do we care? What is the importance of the mission? Okay, why are we here? That's the issue statement. Number two, the problem statement. What problem is the UAS going to solve? All right, and I really want to get the word UAS in here. I'm just going to edit this real quick. Does the UAS project hope to solve with the UAS? Okay. So the issue, why are we here? The problem, what are we going to solve with the UAS? So the overall project goal is a qualitative description of the purpose of the UAS. So the overall project goal is something nice and lofty. It's very similar to our title, okay? And our title should be descriptive. Our project title, whatever we're calling the project, we want that to be pretty descriptive but very succinct. So with our overall project goal, we want that to be sort of lofty and general as well, and it might be a little bit more lengthy than our title, but also pretty succinct. All right, and then we have our UAS mission specific objectives. So number 4 are the specific accomplishments to be achieved with the UAS. All right, so now that we have a little bit of understanding about what those 4 elements of defining the UAS project are, let's work through the examples that I talked about up top. So example 1, in the end, we want to identify the distance between the crew's current location and the known hotspot. So our issue statement, so why do we care? What are we doing here? Accurate location information will hasten the fire crew's ability to deploy and effectively fight the fire. Right? So that clearly defines why we have a UAS with our crew to begin with, right? What's the problem statement that we're gonna solve with that UAS? From the ground, a direct route to the active hotspot is difficult to identify, right? So imagine we're looking around, all we see is forest, right? But as soon as we can throw a UAS 200 feet up in the air and get above the forest, now all of a sudden we can see exactly where that hotspot is located. So the problem is we can't see shit from the ground. There's your problem statement. So our overall project goal is to provide situational awareness to the firefighting assets on the ground. So, you know, not only for our fire crew, but we can also identify other hotspots around, and we can radio other fire crews and let them know what's going on. We can provide more information than just for ourselves. Okay, and then what are the specific UAS mission objectives? All right, so these are things we are going to use the UAS to accomplish. So we're going to fly the UAS to identify the location of the hotspot relative to the crew's current position. And there's a few different ways we can do that. Number 2, identify a safe route of travel for the crew to engage the hotspot. Number 3, estimate the time of travel to the hotspot. All right, and so how are these things related to the UAS? So number 1, we can fly that UAS right over the hotspot, and what we can do is we can look at the ground control system and say, oh, that hotspot is exactly 500 feet away from our current location. Bam, so objective 1 accomplished. Number 2, identify a safe route of travel for the crew to engage the hotspot. So we fly out to the hotspot, and as we're flying back, we're identifying terrain. We're looking at open spots to sort of identify a good route for us to travel on our way to accomplish the hotspot. So that's something we definitely are going to accomplish during flight with the UAS. And number 3, estimate the time of travel to the hotspot. So, and that's just something we're going to gauge. We're going to use what we're seeing in the UAS to say, well, terrain looks pretty steep or the vegetation looks pretty thick. It's going to take some time to get there. But these are all 3 of these objectives can be accomplished specifically with the UAS. All right, so let me go into example 2. So if you remember example 2, we want to identify resource allocations for multiple crews for the next week. Okay, so this is again a bit more of a complicated project. So our issue statement, why are we here? Why do we care? Effective fire mitigation requires effective and timely deployment of firefighting resources. Okay, that makes sense. Problem statement. Without accurate maps of terrain and ground cover, knowing, I guess there should be a comma there, and ground cover, comma, knowing where crews will be needed most is nearly impossible. So if we don't know what's on the ground, we don't know what fuels are there, we don't know how steep the terrain is, it's pretty much impossible to estimate what we're going to need for resources over the next week. So what's our overall project goal? We want to create geographic products to aid in understanding the most likely areas of fire spread over the next week. So what are our UAS mission objectives? To create a terrain map of anticipated burn areas over the next week. Number 2, provide a map of fuel types over this area. And number 3, identify likely burn routes relative to the current fire locations. All right. So this is all data collection, right? So maybe we're using a couple different sensors. We talked about a thermal sensor to identify the intensity of heat or where the fire is burning. Maybe we use a different a vegetation sensor to create maps of the current vegetation types. Or we also can use an infrared sensor to create a terrain map that just is going to give us information about the terrain and the ground around. And all this information is going to be combined. We talked about that 4th principle of the project, really going to be very important for the second example, and where that 4th principle is really not that important for the first example. All right, and so that is really that is defining the project. And if you look, I want everyone to note how short this stuff is, okay? These are short and sweet statements. I get a lot of people that want to write a paragraph each on these things. That's not what I'm looking for. And if you have a very complicated project, I'm not telling you it's wrong to write that much information. If all that if you write a paragraph of very succinct, very detailed information, that's great. Most likely it does not need to be that long, all right?